Hello and welcome to Draw With Me. Today we're going to color Leonardo, the picture that I started in the last video. If you haven't watched this video, you can watch it here. I'm Gus and this is Wiseguss illustration. In today's video you're going to watch how I use different techniques to color this picture. If you're new in drawing and coloring and you want to learn different techniques for applying in your work, this is the video for you. Ready? Come color with me. For this picture, I'm going to use one of my favorite media combinations, markers and color pencils. Unlike any other combinations where you're going to overlay layers of the different media, in this case, with the markers, you're going to create a base for the color pencils. The big advantage over any other media is that every media over here, the markers and the color pencils, are going to be in a different space in the paper. The markers are going to be inside the paper, are going to be under the surface of the paper, whereas the color pencils are going to be over the surface of the paper. So the color pencils are going to always find a new, fresh surface to attach. I have to clarify that my markers come from very different destinations. I have markers from very known brands to much simpler and cheaper markers like the ones from Dollar City. For Leo's skin, I use the 124 yellow-green from Cure Color. For the bandages and the mask, I use Aegean B146 from Pro Marker. For the side of the shell, I use Cinnamon 0427 from Pro Marker. For the back shell, I use Burnt Umber from Pro Marker. For the front part of the shell and for the sword handle, I use Mustard 0948 from Pro Marker. For his belt, I used the number 61 from RT Series. These are cheap markers from Dollar City. And I used Y724 olive green from Pro Marker. I used the 69 from RT Series in his batch. And for the metal part, I used light gray 801 from Cure Color. Using these markers is very simple. The only thing you need to take care is to color the edges very precisely if you want a kind of crisp result. Then after that, you simply fill in all of the spaces. In case you don't have this kind of markers, you can use Sharpie markers or you can use any kind of school markers. I have used both of these and the results are very good. Just make sure that the hues you use, you can make them lighter or darker with the color pencils later on. These are the colors that I'm going to be using for Leonardo's rendering. The idea for using these colors specifically is to darken some areas and to lighten some areas over the color base that was created with the markers. We're going to start by coloring his head. I'm going to use the darker green to create soft shades. These darker areas will create a gradient towards the base green. Following the light source, I'm going to create a light area in the left of his head. I'm using yellow to make this area lighter, and then I will use white to make it even lighter. And then I'm going to mix up the colors using yellow again. To create a secondary light, I use the same technique, using blue and white. To visualize better all the light areas, I will use a cool gray tone. With a green color similar to the base tone of the marker, I'm going to soften the initial color marks of the shading. I will be using 3 green colors for the skin, one for the softer shades and the darker one to darken some areas. The lighter green is going to soften all the coloring. I will be using yellow and white for the main light areas and light blue and white for the secondary lights. His arms and legs are mostly cylinders, so that's why, yes, you guessed it, we're going to be using Terminator lines. If you don't know what Terminator lines are, you can watch this video. Here you can see how I create a transition from the darker green of the Terminator line towards the lighter green of the marker base. Some areas are going to be basically dark, so I color them using my darker colors. And even in some areas I realized that I had to use even a darker color, so I used my olive green color pencil. Like you can see in the inside of his thigh or in the lower part of his left leg. I will keep using my lightest green to soften all the other coloring and to create a softer transition towards the base green of the marker. After working on the Terminator lines and all the dark areas, I'm going to use my white color and my light blue to create the secondary lights. I constantly check my reference to see his arms and legs and find these secondary lights. With yellow and a little bit of white, I create the main lights. Keep in mind that the secondary lights are going to be stronger but in a smaller area, whereas the main lights are going to be softer and dimmer but in a bigger area. In his mask and in his bandages, I'm going to use a darker blue to create all the dark areas. Lighter blue, similar to the color of the marker, to create transitions from the darker blue to the lighter blue, but also to soften the marks created with the darker blue and make them look more even. The white color is going to help me create lighter areas. It's important to mention that the bandages, for example, are going to wrap around the cylinder that is the arms and the legs. So the color that I do has to follow this direction. You're going to notice how in my coloring I'm going to follow the directionality of the roundness of that cylinder. With that I show the viewer that directionality much better. And of course the roundness of the object. I use ochre and a dark orange to create the darkest areas in his chest and for the sword hilt, making sure that the dark orange color is going to be located in the darkest areas. I also use ochre to create the lines on his chest. And of course I use yellow and white for the lighter areas. I also use ochre to create the shades in his side shell. I use ochre to make some light areas in his shell. Then I use brown to create all the dark areas in his shell, especially in the inside and in the bottom. After that, I used white and yellow to create the light areas. I needed some sharp light areas because his shell is mostly shiny. Finally, I use some warm gray and some black to give some darkness in the metal parts. I also use that warm gray to give some shadow in his eyes. Finally, I use my white paint. This one is from Pentel. This is the best that I found so far. But if you don't have a pen like this one, you can use white paint, and a very fine paintbrush. The idea is not to cover all of the light areas, but to enhance some of them, especially when an area needs to be really shiny. With this, we finished the picture of Leonardo. I hope you enjoyed the process of drawing and coloring, and that you can use a similar process in your own drawings. I hope you like the techniques you learned in this video. If you feel they are useful for you, I invite you to like it, to subscribe, but most importantly, share it with somebody who can find it useful. See you in the next video. Adios!